Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Yan Ma. I currently serve as a VAWA project coordinator at Southwestern College, VAWA being the Violence Against a Woman Act. As you may know, Southwestern College leads the San Diego campus Violence Prevention Consortium. The consortium includes National University, Palomar College, and to a limited capacity, San Diego State University. The grant that is issued and administered through the Office of Violence Against a Woman supports the consortium's efforts to bring awareness to member college communities about the issues underlying violence against individuals. The grant itself is termed as Violence Against a Woman Act, but has been expanded not only to include women, but also to all the individuals. The areas that we focus on under this consortium and through this grant include, but not limited to, domestic violence, sexual assaults, sexual harassment, dating violence, as well as stalking. All of this is to support the prevention of such acts and supports those that have endured these acts and seeking thrivership. Thrivership meaning overcoming, dealing with the impact that some of these things can cause, but also joining in with other individuals and encourage them to also reach thrivership. We hope today's domestic violence training workshop, which is offered during our 2021 Domestic Violence Awareness Month, will help you and better understand the basics of domestic violence. This workshop is presented by Ms. Analicia McKee-Chau. Ms. McKee-Chau is a Shelter and Supportive Services Director at the South Bay Community Services, SBCS. This workshop will review the definition of domestic violence, types of abuse in relationships, the prevention, the prevalence of domestic violence, safety planning, power and control or cycle of violence, and national and local resources. Before we get started though, please allow me a few minutes to go over some of the housekeeping items. First, please hold questions to the end when you will be given an opportunity to present them to our speaker. Also, you can also type your question in our chat box anytime you want. Please mute your connection to support everyone's listening pleasure. And just as a reminder, this section is being recorded and will be made available to you to view or to share with others to view. So let's get started. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ms. Analicia McKee-Chau.
Thank you, Yan. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for having me. As Yan mentioned, I work with SBCS. I am the program director that oversees all of our domestic violence programming. And that includes our 24/7 domestic violence response team, our confidential emergency shelter, our transitional housing and rapid rehousing projects, and our advocacy programs, so our victims advocates. We also have therapy available for all the clients involved in all of our programming. So today I'll be presenting on domestic violence basics. So I'll be giving an overview of what is domestic violence, what are the different ways it can present in a relationship, and some of the resources available. So I can go ahead and share my screen. Can you all see my PowerPoint? Yes, okay. So we're going to start by, I'm going to ask you to count how many times that I ring this bell. And if you can just keep a running count, I'm going to ask you to chime in the chat after 1 minute has passed, okay? Okay. Let's see. Anybody can put in the chat how many? 20. That is correct. Okay. So normally in a presentation that I would do in person, if we were not in COVID times, I would move around the room during a minute and tap people's shoulders and ask them to stand up. And by the end of 1 minute, you would see 20 people standing, and that's the amount of people nationwide impacted by DV. So in this presentation, I have to get a little creative and just ask you to count those bells, but it is pretty alarming because 1 minute goes by very quickly, and that is so many. That's 20 lives too many that are impacted by intimate partner violence. So thank you for paying attention and participating in that activity. A couple of other nationwide statistics about domestic violence. You know, a lot of conversation about intimate partner violence is really geared towards women being the victims and males being the perpetrators. And while statistics lean in that direction, we do know that women can also perpetrate violence, and there can also be intimate partner violence in same-sex relationships as well. So for this statistic, we're looking at, in the cases where women are the victims, women are at an increased risk of danger, increased risk of homicide in the time period that they leave the relationship. So a lot of research shows that it takes several times for someone to completely leave the relationship, roughly 7 times. And, you know, each time that they return, the violence can either increase in severity, it can dissipate for quite some time, leading the person to think, you know, oh, he or she has changed, you know, things are going to be better. And maybe it does, maybe things are resolved, but in other situations it doesn't. And so during that time that somebody does make the choice to leave the relationship, the person, the victim fleeing, is at an increased risk. And in the case of women fleeing, they are 70 times more likely to be murdered in the few weeks after leaving their abusive partner. And that's a pretty alarming statistic I wanted to share with you all. There are, you know, the common reasons that we know people can become homeless. And a lot of the reasons that come to mind include, you know, drug or alcohol addictions or mental health issues. Again, high housing prices, loss of employment. You know, with COVID, we're seeing a lot of different reasons leading to homelessness. But surprisingly, for a lot of people, domestic violence is the 3rd leading cause of homelessness among families. So many children are impacted and become homeless as a result of their parents or, you know, one parent plus a significant other who maybe is not their biological parent having violence in the home and causing their immediate caregiver to flee the home. So what is domestic violence? It can present, like I mentioned before, in a variety of ways. Really common for people to assume that unless there's bruises or scratches, any kind of physical markings, then this person must not be a victim of domestic violence. And that's just not true. So domestic violence is exhibited through the use of power and control. So it's one person in the relationship taking their stance in the relationship to intimidate and gain power and control over the other person. So the definition that I'm going to read to you is a pattern of behavior used against intimate partners that is characterized by increasingly frequent coercive and threatening behavior that can sometimes include physical assaults. A lot of domestic violence never gets physical. There's a lot of manipulation, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse is getting a lot more attention these days. And And those are the different types of abuse that we hear of a lot more frequently, surprisingly, when people are calling our hotlines and reaching out for services. But as we know, the stigma is really that unless it's physical, somebody must not be a victim. So just want to reiterate and emphasize that that is not the case. The abuse is frequently a combination. It can be one of these categories, or it can be two or more. So just keeping in mind that everybody's experience, those who have experienced domestic violence, it can look very different for everybody. So for those of you who have a foundation of knowledge of domestic violence, this is maybe something familiar to you. This is something that I would share a lot in my work with victims in counseling and group counseling. Again, the types of abuse are on the left, what I reviewed earlier, which is the physical, sexual, psychological, emotional, and financial. But the power and control wheel is a tool that is psychoeducational in nature. It can be very validating for someone who has experienced abuse to see these categories and see the descriptions that go along with them. Because when you're a victim and you're being told you're worthless, nobody's going to believe you, you're undocumented, so I can just report you and you know you'll never see the kids again. All of those threats, you know, can make someone feel really isolated, but also make them feel like nobody will understand their situation. And seeing this all in writing in this tool can be very validating for someone. So it's pieced in different categories: the physical, sexual, and then the other coercive techniques. So you can see here using intimidation, using the children, so making threats of not ever seeing the children again, using visitation as a tactic or denial of visitation, male privilege in the situations where men are the perpetrator. So treating the victim like they are their servant or their slave. Using the financial component. So we have had victims who are the breadwinner. Their partner does not work, yet they have to turn in all of their wages to their partner, and that person is the one making all of the financial decisions, giving the victim an allowance, sometimes very little money, to be able to have the resources needed to survive. So very little food, having to request toilet paper, things for basic needs. Isolation from support system is very common as well, because the more I can keep you from your support system, the more you're dependent on me, and the more you need to stay in this relationship, and the more power and control I have over you. So that is another technique that is used to have control over a partner. Emotional abuse can be seen as belittling, putting someone down over and over again, making them think that they're crazy, and making them feel guilty about anything. It could be, you know, showing up 5 minutes late from work, dropping a crumb on the floor. It can be really minor things that this person makes their victim feel horrible for. So this, if you're interested, you can always Google this. It's called the Power and Control Wheel. And this is another common infographic used for psychoeducation for domestic violence. And this is referred to as the cycle of violence. So what is seen in domestic violence relationships is really this ongoing cycle. So what starts off as maybe tension building in the relationship, you know, you can kind of get the sense that the abusive partner is upset, you know, whether that's by the way they walk with like really angry footsteps, they're maybe giving the silent treatment, they're slamming cupboards and doors, or, you know, verbally, they're letting you know that they're upset and angry. So that tension is building, and we've all been in situations where we feel that there's tension in a room. That is what I'm talking about. It's a sense of feeling that something is building and leading to an explosion. And so eventually things do come to a head and the perpetrator has some type of outburst. That can be the physical violence. That can manifest as an argument and, grabbing someone's phone and throwing it against the wall, or it can manifest in a really big outburst and remarks about the victim and them being, XYZ. So typically, after that explosion, maybe the victim makes remarks of wanting to end the relationship, wanting to leave, or they're apologizing. I mean, it could be, the dynamic could lead them to feel like this was all their fault. And what is seen a lot of times next is called the honeymoon phase. And this is a time when the perpetrator makes a lot of promises. Promises that this will not happen again, promises that they will change, they'll get the help that they need. I didn't mean it. I'm so sorry. I had a couple of drinks. That's not me. All of those kind of sayings that can lead someone to believe this was a one-time thing, or this isn't really something they would normally do. But then this cycle continues and we're back at the tension building phase. And then we're back at the explosion and again at the honeymoon. The honeymoon can sometimes lead to just those phrases I was sharing, or it can lead to grand acts of grand gestures like buying flowers or buying someone a gift, really showering them with these beliefs that this was a one-time thing and it's going to be okay. So this cycle can happen, over a really long span of time. An explosion can happen and then it could go, 2 years before another one happens. And so that can lead someone to believe like, oh, they really did mean it. They felt really bad. It's not going to happen again. Or this cycle can happen multiple times in a day. Really, whatever the level of domestic violence is happening in a relationship determines how often this cycle is being experienced. So we have had, victims that we work with that, have experienced this cycle, ups and downs, multiple times a day. All right. Many people have heard that if you're growing up in a home where you're witnessing domestic violence, that can lend itself to either have you be a victim in future intimate relationships or a perpetrator. So this statistic is showing, generationally how violence can manifest across relationships. So worldwide, men who are exposed to DV as children are, based on research, 3 to 4 times more likely to perpetuate intimate partner violence as adults than men who did not experience DV as a child. So that's pretty significant to show that, children are greatly impacted. And if they're not shown that DV is not okay, then it can lead them to see and experience the DV and feel that this is normal. It's normal for people to fight and scream and throw things at each other. It's normal to see, mom hitting dad and keeping the room locked and all of us kids in there. Children later in life might experience similar things in their relationships and really not realize that those are not healthy relationships, just because it was normalized during their upbringing. And so this wheel is a visual for you all to see how DV can impact children. If you've never seen there's a YouTube video that shares a study of the brain and how domestic violence impacts children. It is called First Impressions. And if you watch that on YouTube, it's really interesting because it shows interviews with children who witnessed, their father having an outburst and throwing spaghetti against the wall. And when officers show up at the home, the spaghetti's dripping down the wall. And there were 3 children in the home at the time that this outburst happened. And a lot of times parents, when law enforcement comes to the scene or our advocate team is on the scene, there's a lot of minimization that can sometimes happen in regards to children being aware of what's happening. So we might hear someone say, well, they were sleeping, they didn't hear anything. They don't know what's happening in our relationship. And if you can remember as a kid, when you're asleep in the other room and parents are still awake, you hear things. And what this video shows is actually the younger and younger that children are in being exposed to potential outbursts or trauma, it changes the development of the brain. And so research is showing that from a very, very early age, yes, they may have been sleeping or in another room and not physically seeing what happened, but they are absolutely impacted. And that can present in a number of ways, either really quickly after the incident or the exposure has happened, or later down the line. So some of the impacts on children, the longer term impacts can be physical health problems, behavior problems in school. They can wet the bed. Maybe they're acting out in the classroom, or as a teen, starting to abuse substances, having delinquent behavior, and then emotionally struggling with symptoms of PTSD or problems making friends. Maybe their social skills aren't there. Children can be violent from an early age. And so maybe they're acting out what they're seeing at home on the playground. They may also isolate themselves from other children. So there's a lot of different ways that being in a home with domestic violence can impact children. So this is another topic that doesn't get addressed as often. We see a lot of information on, what do the direct victims experience, but I think it's really important to remember that everybody in the home is impacted. So safety planning is a very important conversation to have with people who are experiencing violence and maybe they haven't decided to leave the relationship yet or are actively planning to flee. And so this is a very short list. We use different tools with our advocate team and at our shelter to plan for safety. That encompasses a lot more areas, but I just wanted to share these basics with you. And if you've ever seen the movie Enough with Jennifer Lopez, that movie is, portraying her fleeing her abusive relationship with her young child. And you can get the picture of all the things that kind of lead up to that planning, and then the important things that one might not remember to take with them in a very quick situation of needing to get out. So this is a list of some things to consider. The one thing I wanted to point out is safe places in the home. That would be for situations where somebody is maybe safety planning but not intending to flee. So, kind of being conscious and prepared, because people, are well-versed to what someone's triggers are, what can upset their abuser. And so if they're sensing that, their abuser is either in a bad mood or the tension is rising, it's important to plan where you will be in the home so that you're not around, in the kitchen where there's dangerous objects such as knives, in the bathroom where there's really hard countertops, or, the use of water can be used. So just being really conscious and careful of how to react to the anger and where you would be in the home. All right. Emergency shelter has there's a lot of myths about shelters. And so here in San Diego, there are different shelters that have different eligibility requirements. So with SBCS, our shelter is confidential and we only accept families. So if somebody is single and does not have any minor children, they will need to look at another shelter option. But what shelters in general offer are the safe, confidential locations where services are provided. So it is, a program that is offered to the victim and their family. There's no rent collected. They can typically stay anywhere from, I put 30 to 90 days, but a lot of shelters in San Diego are 28 days. Ours is a standard 60. And it's offering the safe housing for the family who's fleeing. So with our shelter, a lot of questions that come up in regards to shelters are, what you might think from a movie. Is it a big auditorium with a bunch of cots set up and it's kind of this communal living situation that can make people feel really uneasy and really hesitant to flee if they're picturing that that's where they're going to be taking their children? So our shelter is not set up that way. We have individual apartment units where they are able to take a deep breath, relax with their family, address their trauma, and really kind of repair the pieces that have maybe been broken in their relationship. So it's a welcoming environment that I think is a huge relief when families come and see, that it's not at all what they pictured based on, stigma of shelters. So I did just want to share that. In San Diego County, we're really lucky. We get hotline calls from victims all over the US who are attempting to flee to San Diego. And a lot of times we ask, why is it that you're wanting to come to San Diego? They mention they don't have any contacts out here, no support system. But San Diego is known for having a wide array of domestic violence services. So this is just a quick list of just some agencies that have services. One of the neat things about San Diego is we even have a partnership, the shelters, with Rancho Coastal Humane Society. There are a lot of reasons why people decide not to leave a relationship. And one of those reasons can be their pet. And a pet becomes a part of people's families. And when you hear that most shelters don't accept animals, that might be a reason why somebody stays in a really toxic relationship. And how horrible is that, right? We want to be able to offer safety, but we also want people to be able to keep together their family, whoever that might be. And so Rancho Coastal Humane Society is so generous in allowing temporary stay for the pets of DV victims who are entering a shelter. So that's one thing I always like to share because it's such a unique service that is available and people just don't know about it. So there are different DV hotlines in San Diego. SBCS is ours, but these other agencies operate hotlines as well. Some are more shelter focused. Actually, I think the majority of these are. With SBCS, we can take information from a victim who maybe just wants counseling, who maybe needs an advocate to support with some legal questions, or somebody who is looking for shelter. So these hotlines are 24/7. And things that should be covered in a hotline, if somebody is reaching out for that support, they should be able to offer safety planning over the phone and any type of crisis intervention or shelter screening. So most of these hotlines will operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And many of them also offer crisis intervention for sexual assault victims as well. Another thing I wanted to share is, we're looking a lot at what is the unhealthy side of a relationship look like. And we know that relationships can be experienced on a spectrum, very healthy, but also very toxic. And so there's a lot of in between. But when we talk about healthy relationships with the families that we're working with, we want this to be their end goal. We want them to understand that they deserve a relationship where they are experiencing that equality. And so some people have never experienced that. Maybe they've never been raised in a home where they saw that. So it's important to share this as well. The power and control wheel is a tool to do validation of somebody's experience. And then this equality wheel is the hope. So we're giving people hope of what they deserve and what we hope their future relationships will look like. And that is it for my presentation. I have a lot more information that I'm happy to share if people have questions. And I don't know if you just wanted to read out anything or just let people chime in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Analicia. Thank you for the presentation. It's very informing. And if you have any question, please feel free to raise your virtual hand. Or if you want, you can also type it in the chat box. Yeah, May, I think May has a question.
Hi, Analicia. Thank you so much for the presentation. I apologize. I had another meeting where I was held up for most of the hour. Just to confirm, SBCS, you do provide a lot of support for survivors of domestic violence, correct? So in certain situations, would you provide even help for survivors and their children? Because I understand a lot of, survivors, they try to pull themselves and their children out of a abusive and potentially dangerous situation. So does your center do that for them?
Yeah, so our shelter is for families. So we accept their children. It used to be the case that shelters would not accept teenage boys and older, which can you imagine what is a parent supposed to do and what kind of decision are they gonna be faced with making? And that is no longer the case. So thank goodness, whoever is part of the nuclear family, if a grandparent lives in the home, if adult children are still living in the home, they are welcome to enter the shelter with their parent. As far as other children's services that we offer, we have support groups for children ages 5 to 17. And so they're broken into age appropriate groups. There's 3 different groups. I might say it wrong, but I think it's 5 to 8, 9 to 12, and 13 to 17. And the curriculum covered in those support groups is concurrent with what we only offer women's support groups. When it's a male victim, we refer out to male support groups in the community. So if their mother is also getting support group in the women's group, then the subjects align, which is really nice because there can be conversation in the home after the fact. So I hope that answers your question. At shelter, yes, we have services for children as well as with counseling.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much.
Okay, and one more thing to note is that our agency actually also has a therapeutic preschool. So as I mentioned, the earlier or the younger the kid is, the more it can impact their brain development. And so we have a preschool that is called Mi Escuelita, and it is open for 3 to 5-year-olds who have been exposed to family violence or trauma. So that is a resource that they don't need to be in the specific South Bay area. I think there are some eligibility components, but if that's an interest or a need for somebody, you can reach out to our agency.
Thank you so much. That's very, very good to hear.
Okay, so I see from Shiraj, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Are there domestic violence shelters allowing more than 90 days of stay? And typically that would be a no, only because shelters are meant to be on a temporary basis, and there's such a high need that the intention is that while they're in the shelter during those 60 to 90 days, they're working intensively with a case manager to secure their next housing. So the intention of a shelter is never meant to be long-term. The hope would be that they're either going to transition into transitional housing or a voucher type program, or maybe they have employment and they just needed some sort of temporary lodging, and then they can go rent from a landlord on their own. There's a lot of different situations that come through, and we've seen all of those examples that I mentioned happen. So that really is the nature of a shelter, is that it's meant to be short-term. And do any shelters make you pay? No. And if they do, should probably report them, because they should not be charging. The difference between a shelter and a transitional housing, though, is that payment. So transitional housing has a lot of similarities to a domestic violence shelter. If it's a domestic violence transitional housing program, it is still confidential in nature. So you're not supposed to have any visitors, and the location is kept private. However, they do charge a percentage of the client's income towards rent. So it's kind of like a tiered system, where at the shelter there was no rent, they're maybe getting things a little more situated and stabilized. And then in transitional housing, it's a step up in that they're paying a percentage of their income towards rent. They're getting better situated with employment, with their children in school, all of those things. And then at the end of that program, the idea is they're ready to go rent from a community landlord. So I hope that explains maybe where somebody might think they need to pay, but that should not be for a shelter.
I have a follow-up question to that. It's sort of along the same vein. Because it concerns money. So in your experience, do you see, is it often, folks of a certain socioeconomic strata who utilizes your services? Because when we think about, folks, victims or survivors from affluent homes, communities, incomes, I mean, do they reach out to your center for services as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The majority are lower income, because you would imagine that maybe somebody who has some income can, get a hotel for a few nights, and then maybe they have a really great support system in the area that they can lean on. The issue with support system is that the perpetrator, usually, if you've been in a long-term relationship, knows where they all live. So your support system may not be a safe location for you to go. So that can create issues. Credit cards and linked bank accounts can create issues. So somebody might have a lot of money, but if they don't have cash on hand, they might not be able to go check into a hotel, because if their records are shared, they can be easily located. The other example that I gave earlier in May, I don't know if you were on the call yet, is people who are the breadwinner, the victims who are the breadwinner in the relationship, but have been controlled to turn all of their wages over to the abuser, and they don't have access to their own money. And other situations where the victim has money, that money can sometimes be tied up in legal fees if they're, trying to process a divorce. or a restraining order, different legal things, or it might be tied up in the home that they might own with the perpetrator. There's different reasons why they may not have immediate access and still might require a shelter stay. And then one more thing I'm thinking of is in regards to support systems is sometimes people's support systems can be drained. They might be tired of hearing over and over again that, you know, this is the last time, I promise I'm not going to go back to this person. And then once again, you know, an incident comes up. And so we hear that a lot, that, you know, I can't reach out to my sister. I can't reach out to my mom. She's done being there for me. And, you know, it's understandable. I think it's heartbreaking to hear, but at the same time, we've had people's emergency contacts telling us, you know, they cannot come here because then it puts my family in danger. So really their options become very limited, and money can be really deceiving. And I think on the service provider end, we can sometimes be judgmental and thinking, you know, you drive this kind of car, you have these nice clothes, you must be able to have X, Y, Z. And that's really just not the case in situations of domestic violence.
Thank you. That is very, very informative.
It looks like Diana has a hand raised.
Yes, thank you. So as you mentioned, it takes an average about 7 times for an abused person to actually leave the relationship for good. And you said that sometimes your support system kind of says, you know what, I'm done. I've listened, or I've tried helping several times. What can one do to, you know, to fully understand or provide, you know, support when you know you've seen this cycle over and over again, and they have to be ready to leave the relationship at their terms? But how do you not, as a supporter, get drained and still be there for them, seeing it from an outside perspective?
It's a really good question and a really tough question, because it happens a lot. We had a grandmother drop off her like mid-20-year-old granddaughter with 6 children at our agency and just said, you know what, you guys have to take her. I can't handle this anymore. I love her to death, but I cannot be part of this, this situation. Her family members were in law enforcement. So you would think, you know, someone with those connections surely can't be in this situation, but people get drained. So unfortunately, because she was dropped off and essentially, you know, it was now our responsibility to help out, this was not her choice. It still was other people telling her, you need to leave, you need to do this, you need to do that. She had already lost her voice to her perpetrator, and now she was losing her voice to her support system. So she came to our shelter, but in less than a week, our security cameras caught her perpetrator going up to her unit. So she was not ready. It was not the right timing for her. And it just shows that, you know, you cannot force it. You cannot force someone to leave. It might be the most toxic relationship you are seeing from the outside, and completely mind-blowing why this person continues to stay in that relationship. But there are so many holds that a perpetrator can have, and they are very, very manipulative. And they can groom people to really feel like they have no other option. And so really, as a support system who may be drained, all you can say is, you know, I'm here for you when you're ready. You can put those boundaries up and say, you know, you cannot, I don't feel comfortable with you coming and staying at my home, but when you're ready, I can help you safety plan. I can help you call places. When you're ready, I'm here for you and I'm here to listen. And I would say, you know, not cutting that off so that when they are ready to have that conversation, they know that they can turn to you and that they haven't worn you down.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I have another question.
Sure.
Just because I missed of your presentation, if you mention whether or not your organization helps with different cases, the U visa, you know, for victims of domestic violence, how they could apply for the U visa. Do you guys handle anything related to that?
So we don't and offer legal services ourselves, but we subcontract with Legal Aid Society of San Diego. So we do have a lot of clients who come here with immigration needs, and we can link them to the appropriate services. It's not always a guarantee, you know, U visa situations are very drawn out. They can take years to resolve, but we can at least make referrals and get the process started.
Okay. Thank you, Analicia. Any other questions from our audience members?
One thing to point out is that there is a recent, and maybe you have all heard of it, a new Netflix series called Made, and it's getting a lot of publicity, and it highlights, I'll put it in the chat, Made spelled like a house cleaner. And it follows a young woman, a mother of a young girl, in her process of leaving a DV relationship. It shows all the obstacles that can come up for someone when they're reaching out for social service help. It can be very disheartening. I'm actually having my team, oh, Daisy said she saw it. We are watching and discussing each episode as an exercise to self-reflect and also, you know, honor the victims that we work with.
All right. Thank you so much, Analicia. Thank you everyone for attending our event of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And we hope to see you at our future events as well. Have a great day. Thank you. Goodbye.